Okay, shalom, everybody. Thank you for joining. A funny class. Rabbi Nachman, who was he? Who is he in a nutshell, B'ezrat Hashem? Let's try to see how we can do this. So, Rabbi Nachman, Rabbeinu, was born in the year 1772. He passed away in the year 1810 at the age of 38. And what he accomplished in his lifetime is something that people, if they were to live 1,000 years, would not be able to grasp. He did a lot. He did a lot and reveals his secret of how he reached what he reached. He gave over, it was heard from him directly, what devotions he did. He did all types of crazy things. He rolled in snow. He stayed under in a freezing mikveh water for like a few hours. He fasted from Shabbat to Shabbat. But after all of this, when he discovered what talking to Hashem can actually do, the simplest devotion of just talking to Hashem, he regretted all of those self-mortifications, and he said it's totally unnecessary, because a Jew, one second, is there something wrong here with the volume? Let's just turn it up, 1 second. Can you guys hear me? Can everybody hear the class? If you can hear me, just make a little indication so I know that you guys can hear me. You guys can hear me, okay? How about on Zoom? Can everybody hear me on Zoom? Yes, okay, good. So, going back, Rabbi Nachman, he said that the power of simple expression to Hashem, just talking to Hashem, is so powerful that if a person, number one, believes in it enough, and he's consistent in doing it, and he doesn't give up, he can reach untold levels. So Rabbi Nachman used himself as a proof. He said, I had no idea that there existed levels that I have finally integrated and perceived, and who knows what's more out there, to the extent that a day before he passed away, in the year 1810, in Chol HaMoed Sukkot, he indicated to Rav Nosson, I want to already remove my body. I want to have sheet to take off this body, because it's blocking me from reaching the next level. And the only way I can reach the next level is if I leave this physical body. He was so into what was waiting out there. And also he indicated what was his thrust for advancing, not for a personal gain, but he understood that the greater, higher levels he could reach, the greater levels he can help Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, because he said about himself, Rabbi Nachman, I did not come down to this world for myself. I came here to help Am Yisrael come back to Hashem. It was like a public tzaddik for all of us. He said, I'm not here for myself. If I reached anything, it's to help the Jewish people to come back. He accomplished a lot, but not everything of what he did and achieved. He wrote, it's brought down in his book, Rabbi Nachman's Wisdom. In Hebrew, it's called Shivchei Haran and Sichot Haran, and his book, Chaim Moran. He did a lot of things, but like we said, the main thing he said, that what he invested in the most that brought him to his high level, an unfathomable level, was being consistent and putting all of his weight, if you want to say, all of his energy, investing it in the power of talking to Hashem. And that's what opened the gates for everything else. Even for Torah study, he said about himself that he was an average child and he couldn't understand even the Mishnah. When he was learning Mishnah in the Cheder, in the Talmud Torah, he couldn't even understand that. And he even got smacks from the Rebbe that he could understand. What did he do? He cried. He cried to Hashem to open his eyes. And with enough davening, his mind was opened up to understand the Mishnayot. And then he saw that he was able to do this. It worked. He did this eventually also of Gemara, Midrash, Zohar, Kabbalah. He used davening as a means for everything. He said that's his secret for Hatzlacha. So Rabbi Nachman, he had lived a very short lifespan, already at a young age. Some say already at the age of 6, he began to think about the purpose of life. People wonder, how could a 6-year-old, even back then, 200 years ago, how could a 6-year-old think about the purpose of life? So they say that it was thanks to his mother, Fega, Rabbi Nachman ben Fega, right? His mother's name was Fega. His father's name was Simcha. They say about his mother that as soon as he was born, Rabbi Nachman, she immediately did netilat yadayim. She washed his hands, like the proper washing hands when you wake up in the morning, to remove the impurity of his birth. And she quickly covered his head with a kippah. His head was not uncovered from the time that he was born. So that's not easy, obviously. And because she put in that effort to do that, so she was given this gift of such a high, holy neshama. They say there's a BRESLOV tradition of a story that she was called Fega, the Neviah, Fega, the prophetess. Fega, the mother of Rabbi Nachman, she had two holy brothers, Rabbi Baruch of Mezhebosh and Rabbi Ephraim of Sudilkov. All three of them were children of Odel. The children of Odel, who was the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov. And Rabbi Baruch and Rabbi Ephraim, they held very high esteem their sister Fega. She was considered in their eyes as, like I said, tzadikis, and someone who had possessed divine inspiration. So the story goes, her husband, Rav Simcha, he liked doing hitbodedut. He liked going off like for a week to just serve Hashem, to go out in the forest and the meadows. Already, Rabbi Nachman's father, Simcha, was someone who liked to go away, and he was also a businessman, Rav Simcha, but he would go away for a time and then come back. In the Ukraine, they're not lacking forests and fields. They lived in Mezhebosh, the hometown of the Baal Shem Tov. They, in fact, Simcha and Fega inherited the house of the Baal Shem Tov. They lived in that house. Rabbi Nachman was born in the house that the Baal Shem Tov had. That was his house, and it passed down 2 generations later to the hands of Fega and her husband Simcha. So the story goes that Fega, her mikveh night was Friday night, and her husband said a week before that he will be at home on time for Shabbat. And Fega had the custom to receive already Shabbat early from Plaga Mincha. She lit the candles already early. She was already purified for the mikveh and everything, whatever, at that time, Friday night. And her husband's not home. It's already before the candlelight even. She was worried. So she did some unifications, whatever she knew, and she couldn't locate with her GPS, her spiritual GPS, she couldn't locate her husband, Rav Simcha. And she was worried. She lit the Shabbos candles. She went to the mikveh already, everything done. And she was waiting. And she fell asleep, and she dreamt that she saw Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, our matriarchs, and they were leading her to chambers with light. So she passed by one chamber, and there was a strong light coming out. She said, "Whose chamber is this?" They said, "This is the chamber of your grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov." And then they brought her to another chamber, and the light was blinding. She couldn't even look at it. And she asked, "And whose chamber is this?" They said, "This is the chamber of the son that you are going to become pregnant with." She woke up from the dream, and she sees her husband with Simcha at the door. She said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I got lost in this forest, and I couldn't find my way. And finally, I found my way, and I came home." She understood that it was the Yetzer Hara doing this to prevent them from being together. They were together. She conceived, and this is the soul of Rabbi Nachman. The tradition is that she herself told this over to the BRESLOVers. She said once, "You think you know what Rebbe you have? I'll tell you what a Rebbe you have." And she told this story about how Rabbi Nachman was conceived her son. So Rabbi Nachman, he lived like a regular child. He played and jumped around. But already, like we said, at age 6, he began to think about his purpose. And he began to do things to try to serve Hashem at age 6. And he hid this from other people. He, for example, took upon himself that he wants to try to detach himself from enjoying food. So he tried swallowing food without chewing it, but he got sick. His throat got swollen, so he had to start doing that. And he did all types of things. For example, he went to a freezing mikveh, like we said, in the winter, and he wanted nobody to find out. But his payas were wet and they were frozen. So, but he was able to fool everybody because the adults thought, silly child, who plays in the snow in the winter? Because they saw his payas were like frozen and wet a little. They had no idea. They didn't think that he went to the mikveh at such a young age, but he actually did. How do we know this again? Because he himself told over this what he did. And he spent a lot of time davening by the Baal Shem Tov's grave and other tzaddikim. He was very big into davening by graves of tzaddikim and requesting and asking. And he said that's what built him up a lot. So Rabbi Nachman, his young age, he was hidden. No one knew he was. At the time, the custom was to get married right after the bar mitzvah. People back then in the early 1800s, the late 1700s, people were still getting married at the age of 13. Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. That's amazing. As opposed to today's culture and society, everybody's immature. But back then, as soon as you're considered halachically an adult, yalla, get to marriage, straight to marriage. So right after, not long after his bar mitzvah, which of course was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he got married, and he wanted to see how other guys, other young men his age were holding, and he tested them, like he played games with them, not revealing his true intent, trying to find out from them to squeeze out of them what they really wanted, and he saw they all wanted just to have a good time in this world, to enjoy themselves and everything. His first person that he met who was sincere was someone who was to become his shamash, Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon, the student of Rabbi Nachman, who's buried, believe it or not, in Tzfat, right below the whole section of the Arizal, the Ramak, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, all those Kabbalists, one level right below, before you get to the Beit Yosef and the cave of the Bat Ayin, the famous cave there, you have there Rav Shimon, his wife and his son buried together. It's painted blue. It's very noticeable today. They put even a plaque there explaining who he is. Rav Shimon, also for some reason, we don't know why, was he related to the side of the Kala, the side of the Khatan, we don't know, but he was at the wedding. And before the actual wedding, Rabbi Nachman also wanted to test him out. And he told Rabbi Nachman, I have no interest in these worldly desires. He said, Rabbi Nachman said, come on, you don't want to have a good time in this world? He said, no, I want to serve Hashem. So Rabbi Nachman said, it seems that me and you were going to have a good connection in our lives, which is eventually what happened. And Rabbi Nachman began to reveal a bit about who he was in himself. And Rabbi Shimon on the spot became attached to him. He said, I want to stay with you for the rest of my life. I know you're going to become somebody big, and I want to serve you, B'ezrat Hashem. And he even squeezed out of Rabbi Nachman later on that he should be his shamash even in the world to come. Even in the world to come. So the rest of us have a joke. If you want to send a message to Rabbi Nachman, you can't afford leaving Israel, you're in the Holy Land, travel to Tzfat, leave a message by Rav Shimon's grave to address Rabbi Nachman up there, because he's the shamash, he's next to him, right? Even in the world to come. In any event, Rabbi Nachman was still hidden, even though he had this acquaintance with Rav Shimon. He told him to keep it secret. Nobody knew about his devotions. He was still at that time doing also all these types of self-mortifications. He was fasting, even forced his wife to swear not to tell anybody of his fasting from Shabbat to Shabbat. He had nosebleeds, he was sick, he had all types of hemorrhages, but he kept on going. But then again, we have to reiterate, he afterwards threw out everything and said, this is not necessary. It's totally, totally unnecessary, because you can accomplish this and much, much more. We can accomplish whatever self-mortifications do, plus much, much more, just by this simple devotion of talking to Hashem. That's how powerful it is. If we would truly invest in Hitbodedut 100%, we wouldn't look the way we are. The whole reason Rabbi Nachman teaches why we are the way we are, so much setbacks and so fallen and so trapped in our lust and everything, is because we're not fully invested in Hitbodedut. It's very simple. If you totally 100% invest yourself in Hitbodedut, you believe in it 100%, what it can do to you, what it can transform, change you into, we wouldn't look the way we are looking, actually, each and every one. Nonetheless, still we grab what we can, and thanks to the little bit of good that we do, each and every one of us, especially Hitbodedut, we can ascribe major salvations in life to the Hitbodedut that we've done, that is just accumulated over the days, the weeks, the months, the years. But Rabbi Nachman was a warrior. He went full force. He even said that anyone can reach his level. He said, don't think I reached my high level because I'm a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and like the expression goes, I'm born on top of the mountain. He said, that's all not true. I worked hard, he said about himself. I worked hard. I killed myself. And again, especially in Hitbodedut, he invested till he reached the level that he reached, B'ezrat Hashem. That's a very powerful thing. Okay? So he was still incognito until the age of 18. For some reason, at the age of 18, there was an incident that his father-in-law, he remarried. The first wife, she passed away. Rabbi Nachman got involved in finding a shidduch for his father-in-law from Moilov. Moilov is like on the border between Moldova and Ukraine. And there were their followers of Rav Baruch, the uncle of Rabbi Nachman, Rav Baruch of Mezhebush, and they're also involved with the side of the Kala for the Shidduch. And Rabbi Nachman also, because of the family connection, was able to make the Shidduch. And they went there, and the Shidduch was made. And at the time there was a L'chaim, whatever. And they gave Rabbi Nachman. He was 18 years old only. He wasn't a Rebbe, nothing. He was respected as being a great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. They gave him a little bit to drink, and because he drank a little, he began to speak, and he was talking, and people, they were like they couldn't believe what he was saying. The insights, the chidushim that he was talking about were just unimaginable. People melted as soon as they heard it, and everyone there attested that this person is going to become somebody big after what they heard, the insights and the chidushim of Torah that he gave over. Word got out, and he at that point became openly revealed. People started traveling to him from all over, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, just to get a bracha, just to listen. And it became known that anybody who came in contact with him and just heard him talk, they became a different person. People woke up, and people were interested in sincerity and honesty to serve Hashem. Just they weren't making it because it was just too hard. When they heard of his transformable powers of talking to people and instantly waking them up, so it hit the headlines. People, again, started traveling far and wide, sincere people, honest people, good people who were looking to serve Hashem. They weren't making it. They came and they were transformed. And he immediately hit wildfire, and his fame began to spread and spread and spread. And it did invoke jealousy by other Rebbes and other Hasidim, because he was offering something that they weren't getting from their Rebbes. Rabbi Nachman had a power to wake up people. And what was happening is the cream of the crop from all the other Hasidic groups or wherever who were looking for more, and they weren't getting it where they were willing to throw everything aside just to come closer to Hashem. Sincere people. So word got out. People started coming who were connected to other tzaddikim and everything. So it caused a little bit of a turmoil, a tumult, but there was respect for him because he's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. What are you going to do? You know, this is someone special, and no wonder he's able to get people to come back to Hashem because he's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And anyways, that's the goal, to get people to work to come close to Hashem. So it wasn't so hot, okay? So his fame became more and more and more spread, okay? And then all of a sudden, he said, I have to go to the Holy Land. We're talking about the time in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars in 1801, 1799 to 1801. He traveled to the Holy Land like that. He just left everything. He told his wife, you find a job, the daughters find jobs, take care of yourselves, I'm already leaving. And they started crying. He says, there's nothing to do. I have to be in the Holy Land. And he went to the Eretz Yisrael. He said he walked off the shore on Haifa. They arrived the eve of Rosh Hashanah on Haifa. He just walked 4 steps, and he told the attendant who was with him, who traveled to the Holy Land, he said, okay, I'm ready to go back. He said, to go back? We just came. He said, I already accomplished walking 4 steps, what I needed. I already attained and internalized the mentality of the Holy Land. I'm ready to go back. So the attendant said, we're here already. Let us at least savor the land. Let us go to Tzfat, Tiberia. Let's go to, Meron. He said, okay, I see you really want to be in the Holy Land. Go rent out some donkeys and we'll go join the next caravan. The question is, why didn't he go to Jerusalem? He did try to go to Jerusalem. He was on a ship in Istanbul, and it was in the middle of the war. This is the war, the Napoleonic War. The Jewish community in Istanbul forbade any Jews to travel by ship to go to the Holy Land, saying it was total danger. However, there was someone, a Chacham, from Israel. Some say it's not clear who he was. Some say he was the grandson of the Chida, who was in Chutz La'aretz collecting funds for the Jewish communities, the yeshiva, the Chachamim in the Holy Land. He had a vision, he had a dream that he's supposed to be buried in the Holy Land. And he's now on his way back to the Holy Land in order to be buried. And everybody trusted him. And he said, don't worry, I'm not going to die on the middle of the way. The ship I'm on will be protected. Plus, everybody who will be on the ship with me will be protected because I have to make it back to the Holy Land to be buried. So people were flipping out with that, So word got out. They rented a giant ship so that as many people as possible can join this Chacham on his way to the Holy Land. And many people, including Rabbi Nachman, joined that ship. So they reached the shores of Yafo, which is directly on the same line. I think it's called latitude. Am I right? It's a latitude or horizontal. Sorry, I forget my geography. Or horizontal or latitude with Jerusalem, and everyone got off the ship, but they didn't let Rabbi Nachman get off the ship because they thought he was a French spy. They said with his long peyot, which they weren't used to by the Middle Eastern Jews or the other Ashkenazi Jews, with the Hasidic long peyos, and how he was dressed. The Turks who were there at the time in charge and against Napoleon, against the French, because France wanted to conquer Israel, right? So they didn't let him off the ship. And the Chacham, he became very well acquainted with Rabbi Nachman on that trip from Istanbul to Jerusalem, and they made a pact that they would be together and go together to Jerusalem. Hashem made it that Rabbi Nachman didn't get off at Yafo, and the captain continued the ship towards Haifa, and that's where Rabbi Nachman got off of other people who anyways wanted to go to Haifa. Many of the Hasidic community, many of the Jews at the time, they were living up north. Very few were living in Jerusalem. The majority were living in the Galil at the time, especially the Hasidic community. So anyways, many other Jews, not everybody got off the ship. There were others who wanted to go off the ship by Haifa. So he got off with them, and he spent Rosh Hashanah in Haifa. In fact, on the first day after Tashlich, the whole group of people who were together on the ship and they davened together in Haifa, they went to the cave of Eliyahu Hanavi, which is located on Haifa, on the mountain there, on Mount Carmel. So he was in Israel, and he was here for the whole thing, including the stay in the Holy Land. Some say, but there's no authoritative source, that Rabbi Nachman met Napoleon along the Kinneret. But the source is very, very shallow. There's no BRESLOV sources to the story. The sources are from outside of BRESLOV sources, which is why it's very shallow. But they say he met Napoleon because Napoleon was in Israel conquering in this, and he made it to the Holy Land at the time. In any event, he was here. The whole thing took almost 2 years. 1801, Rabbi Nachman came back to his hometown of Medvedevka. He had moved to eastern Ukraine, Medvedevka, and immediately he set forth to a city called Zlatopolia, which is not far from Medvedevka. And there he suffered 2 years of opposition. That's when the opposition started against Rabbi Nachman by a false slander, a jealousy, whatever you want to call it. Rabbi Nachman said it had to happen. It had to happen. And he says, this is the way of Hashem. That for any time that something really good is about to happen in the world, there has to be some type of an opposing force. Good can't just come down like that with no opposition. There's no fight. It has to come down with a fight. In order for something really good to make a major change in life to happen, something difficult has to come to prevent it. There has to be some type of a challenge. And this is what Rabbi Nachman says, this is the strife amongst the tzaddikim, against the tzaddikim, that is in every generation, even until today. It's package and parcel. Why? Because that's what it does. It pushes people off. When people come from the outside, they do tshuva, they convert, and they see strife amongst the Jewish people, strife amongst the religious people who should know better than anybody else, and yet there's strife here also. And people say, this is Judaism? They ate with this. I don't need it. That's the test. To push off people who are not determined strong enough. They see these tests. This is Judaism. This is Torah. This is what I dropped everything for. I don't need this. Let me go back and enjoy this world. That's the test. Rabbi Nachman says that in lesson number 5, to push off the unworthy, they have to encounter this strife. The person who has simple and strong faith, he will say, I'm seeing this strife because of me, because I'm the problem. Because if I wasn't the problem, I wouldn't see these problems. I wouldn't see this strife. I see this conflict. I see these obstacles. I see this bad. It can't be that what I'm seeing is bad. This is the trait of humility. It must be that I am the problem here, because if I wasn't the problem, why should I see this? He said that's the honest person. The person now who doesn't have haughtiness, or he has haughtiness, but he recognizes that it's haughtiness, and he knows that he's wrong. Such a person has what's called nekudat ha'emet, a point of truth. He can stand up to these type of tests. Rabbi Nachman says this is what's necessary. This is what's needed to get people close. And this explains, this is what Rav Nosson explains, the strife that is against the BRESLOV movement from already Rabbi Nachman's time, when he was alive already, until today. Today, a boy in a regular yeshiva, he buys a ticket to Uman, he comes back, they kick him out of yeshiva. They find guys who are starting, get the other boys to get up at midnight and go to Hitbodedut in the forest, and the regular yeshiva programs that goes against the yeshiva ideology. Just for example, I'm not coming to speak against yeshivas, but a normal yeshiva, the later you go to sleep and you spend the night, the beginning of the night learning Torah, it's considered something very favored. It makes sense to learn Torah at night. The Rambam speaks highly about it. However, according to the Kabbalah and Chassidut, the finest time of learning Torah at night is dafka, specifically after midnight. So this is where the Kabbalah and Chassidut is not in accordance with the regular pshat of learning Torah at night. All the Pashtanim, the Rambam, and everyone favor saying there's no greater time of Torah study than the night when the world is quiet and there's tranquility. That's true, but it's even a higher level, much higher. Like Rav Chaim Vital says, what 1 hour of Torah study after midnight is equivalent to. He says like a crazy amount. The learning Torah after midnight is like equivalent to like 100 hours of Torah study during the day. An hour after midnight on Friday night on Shabbat is like 1,000 hours of Torah study, something like that. Okay, so in the yeshiva world, it's not accepted and everything, and it's hard. People try to take upon themselves BRESLOV devotions. Here, we didn't even go into that yet. We just spoke about Hitbodedut. But opposition started. Let's go back. Opposition started against Rabbi Nachman already from 1801, 1802, until he couldn't live anymore in Zlatipolia, and he asked his uncle Rav Baruch of Mezhibozh, who had what's called a Magidut. The Rebbes, the Hasidic masters, they had like a type of authority over all these villages. Don't forget, in the Ukraine, in Europe, everywhere, even in Morocco and Sephardic countries, you had the main villages and yet small villages, and there were Jews everywhere. There were all these tiny villages still existent today, and there were shtetlich, tons. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of shtetlich in Ukraine, in Poland, okay? That's the way of life of the Jews. They were living in farmland and in cities, okay? Yeah, the Jews living in the big cities, Kiev, etc., Lvov. There were bigger cities. And yeah, Jews living in little hick towns like Breslov, like Uman. Uman was considered also a big city, by the way. We shouldn't belittle Uman. Uman was always considered a garrison city with a high population even back then. All types of Hasidic Rebbes had Hasidim in Uman, where that's how big it was. So Rav Baruch of Mezhibozh, he had a type of authority over the city of Breslov, and he suggested to Rabbi Nachman come to move to Breslov. So he invited him, his nephew, to move and become a Rebbe in Breslov, and the community accepted him warmly and everything. And the first Friday night that Rabbi Nachman did Kiddush in Breslov, so when the cup of wine was poured for Kiddush, it spilled. And Rabbi Nachman said, with that, we have planted ourselves in Breslov. And he said officially, from now on, my followers will be called Breslover Hasidim. That's what it happened in 1802. My followers will be called Breslover Hasidim. And what's interesting, a beautiful insight from Rav Moshe Kramer, is that if we learn from here how to spell Breslov, Bet, Resh, Samech, Lamed Bet, that's the official Hebrew writing of Breslov, not like the old Ukrainian Yiddish Braslav, Bet, Resh, Aleph, and then Lamed Aleph, or Samech. You spell it normally, Breslov, like it's spelled today, Bet, Resh, Samech, Lamed Bet, and anyways it fits in because of the next thing we're going to mention after this. That Breslov, when spelled like that, is the exact gematria of Rabbi Nachman's name. Nachman, Nun Chet Mem Nun, Ben, Bet Nun. Fega with one Yud, Fe, Yud, Gimel, Aleph, is the exact gematria of Breslov. So you see in the name that he chose, Rabbi Nachman's name itself is hinted to. He said, we've planted ourselves in Breslov, and my followers always be called Breslover Hasidim. Even though Rabbi Nachman ended his life, the last like 5 months of his life were in Uman, right? It didn't shift the name. The name Breslov is associated with the following of Rabbi Nachman. They're called the Breslover Hasidim. So in 1802, Rabbi Nachman moved to Breslov, and he was shocked by the lack of enthusiasm that he found in the local shul in Breslov. He said, we don't hear any hand clapping and singing in the davening. What is this? He said, I hold by the Shita, the way of the Baal Shem Tov, who held that a person should, with his sweaty sleeves, dance and clap and jump into Gan Eden. In other words, that davening with simcha and joy was his hashkafa. Rabbi Nachman very much held highly that his followers make a lot of noise when davening, and clapping hands and everything, which make it hard to daven with other people. Yes, that's why there are BRESLOV minyanim. There are BRESLOV minyan, even though unfortunately today someone who overdoes it, it bothers the other BRESLOV Hasidim. But it's understood why in a BRESLOV minyan people will clap their hands and say the words out loud, because this is the way Rabbi Nachman wanted us to serve Hashem. He stressed and said, simcha is the key, right? It's his famous statement, mitzvah gedola liot besimcha tamid. It's a big mitzvah to always be happy, right? That's his statement. Rabbi Nachman made that statement. People say, where does that come from? He brought it out. It's in the Torah, okay? The second thing I wanted to mention is also Rabbi Nachman said that the name BRESLOV indicates what he does. There's a verse from a prophecy that we read. I think we read it in the 3 weeks. V'hasiroti lachem at lev ha'even, v'natati lachem lev basar. The prophet says, please forgive me, or it's Yirmiyahu, or Yeshayahu, or Yechezkel. The verse reads, I will remove from you the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Lev basar are the exact same letters as BRESLOV. That is, when you interchange, according to the permission you have in dialectics, the samech and the sin are interchangeable because they emanate from the same utterance of the mouth. You have what's called the zas sharatz. These letters, zayin, zas, zayin, samech, shin, zas sharatz, resh, and tzadik, sin, they come from the same. There's gutturals, laterals, there's like parts of the mouth. They're called the hey, motza, otape. So in there, the samech and the shin, which is sin, are interchangeable. So BRESLOV has the same letters as lev basar, a heart of flesh. Okay? Because Rabbi Nachman said, that's what I'm here to do. To take your heart of stone, your attitude of being dry and dead, and to wake you up, to give you a heart of flesh. That was his whole thing. He said, Rabbi Nachman about himself, he said in Yiddish, Gor mein Zach is tefillah. My whole thing is davening. My whole thing is I came to help teach people how to daven, whether it's the actual Shachrit Mincha Arvit, the prayers, the fixed prayers in your siddur, whether it's how you say Tehillim, whether it's your Hitbodedut, which is the climax. He said, I came to this world to teach people how to open up to Hashem. It's funny, people till today, they feel, who am I to write my own prayers, to compose my own prayers to God, as if he's listening to me? I said the words in the siddur. Who wrote that? The Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the rabbis of the Holy Assembly, the sages of the Holy Assembly, they're the ones who composed that. But my prayers, as if Hashem has the chutzpah, chas v'shalom, to listen to me, nobody like me, that is pure atheism, that's pure kfirah. Because that you limit Hashem. You limit Hashem that he can't listen to you, even if you're as, God forbid, perverted as you are, and perverse and immoral and wicked and whatever. You limit Hashem by saying he won't listen to me. I'm so bad. Why in the world does Hashem listen to me? Just the opposite. The greatness of Hashem, the greatness of his compassion, is that as low life as you are, God forbid, you try to make any move back to Hashem, Hashem is there. This is a Rabbi Nachman ideology. That's a Jewish hashkafa. It's not just Rabbi Nachman. It's in the Torah. Just Rabbi Nachman emphasizes it much more to bring it out, that you matter. No matter what you've done, you've done the worst thing, and then the guilt inside of you says, why should I daven as if he's going to listen to me? The answer is yes, because every good move makes a difference. You don't believe it? So life, the challenge is the squeezing of life will squeeze you so much until you have to believe it. That if you have no drop of good and don't believe in it, you're not going to make it. Forget it. That's the whole thing here of Rabbi Nachman, is that you have to focus on the good and use it as your springboard to connect to Hashem. How do you connect to Hashem? As you are right now. You people say, how do I come back? Start beficha uvilvavecha lasoto. Connect what's in your mouth and your heart. In other words, the words that come from your heart, and that's how you do. That's your action. This Rabbi Nachman came to the world to teach us how to connect to Hashem. So he came to BRESLOV, and he got people woken up, and people were excited. Who was especially excited was Rabbi Nachman's future main disciple, Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson of Nemirov. He lived in the nearby village. Breslov is located midway between Nemirov and Tulchin. You have to think Nemirov to the north and Tulchin to the south. Okay, and Breslov is in this section of in the middle of the Ukraine. Central left Ukraine is where the location of this little hick town called Breslov is. And Rav Nosson heard about Rabbi Nachman, but he lived all the way in Nemirov. And at the time Rabbi Nachman, who became famous, was in Medvedevka, which is super duper far, like eastern Ukraine. So now that he came, and he had so many obstacles from his family because Rav Nosson, I know we're talking about Rabbi Nachman here, but we're also going a little bit into Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson came from a very, very wealthy, meyuchas, a strong lineaged, and very misnagdish family. He came from a family that were so opposed to the Hasidic movement. They were more into the Litvish mentality. It's called the misnagdim, if you want to call it like that. And he came from that background, and he felt very dry. He wanted to serve Hashem, but he felt very dry. And because of that, he came into Chassidut. He joined the Hasidic movements. He was for a time close to Rav Levi Tzaka Berdichev and other famous Hasidic masters who were living at the time. He already suffered a lot of opposition, and Rabbi Nachman stuck out even more. So for him to travel far to go to Rabbi Nachman was a double whammy for him. He couldn't do that. No, his family wouldn't let that. But now that Rabbi Nachman just moved next door to a village which is literally 2 hours away by horse buggy back then, so he took the opportunity. So he heard Rabbi Nachman came. Rabbi Nachman arrived within a month before Rosh Hashanah. So Rav Nosson came there like in midway for a week before Rosh Hashanah he came, and he was zapped. He was zapped by Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman hinted to him that we are going to have a strong commitment and a connection. Even though Rav Shimon is the shamash of Rabbi Nachman, but Rav Nosson was the one to become Rabbi Nachman's Talmid. He said to him, "You are my Yehoshua." Like Moshe Rabbeinu had a Yehoshua, you are my disciple. You're going to be like Moshe Rabbeinu's the Yehoshua. You are to become my Yehoshua, because Rav Nosson nullified himself totally to Rabbi Nachman. And that was a big chidush. Why? Because Rav Nosson wasn't a nobody. Rav Nosson was already a fully accomplished Torah scholar. They say about him, he was fully knowledgeable in what's called the Sheva Chochmah, the 7 wisdoms, geometry, rhetoric. He knew wisdoms of the world, grammar and everything. That's why you see Rav Nosson, he writes so beautifully. He knew how to write. He knew how to write. He knew how to think. He knew how to express. He had all these amazing qualities. And yet, when he came, and he also knew Torah, he was versed in the Shulchan Aruch. That's why his father-in-law took him. Rav David Tzvi Orbach, the father-in-law of Nosson, was a leading halachic codifier in the Ukraine at the time. He said about Rav Nosson, he said there were other prospective son-in-laws I could have taken who were much more knowledgeable than Rav Nosson, but I chose Rav Nosson because he has wide, broad shoulders, meaning he can handle a lot. In Yiddish, große Pleitzis. He had strong shoulders, he can handle a lot. He trained him. Rav David Tzvi Orbach trained Rav Nosson how to learn halacha, how to make a psak in all 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch. He trained him to become a dayan, believe it or not. So he was knowledgeable. And yet, he was broken inside Rav Nosson because he felt so detached from Hashem. He was so jealous when he saw disciples of Rav Zusha of Anipoli or Rav Elimelech of Lezhensk or other Hasidic masters. He saw the older Hasidim, they were davening with such a dveikut, with such a connection, and he didn't have that. When he went to davening, he was just distracted nonstop. It's like you turn on the static as soon as we start davening. Okay, here we go again. All the distractions came in during davening, something like what we go through today, right? And he couldn't handle Rav Nosson. He was so jealous. He saw other people davening with a connection. He said, "That's what I want. That's what I want. I sit by the Hasidim, so I'm not going to stop. If that's what the truth is, I'm going to go all the way." So that's why he faced opposition. And he advanced, but he still was stuck at a plateau. He advanced when he became a follower of the Berdichever, etc., but he felt empty. There was a time before the year 1802 when Rav Nosson was with the Hasidim of the Berdichever, or Litzka Berdichev, and they were together. They would come together to do Melava Malka from time to time, and they would cast lots who would go out to buy the bagels for Melava Malka. So one Saturday night, the lot fell on Rav Nosson. And Rav Nosson, while he was going to buy the bagels, he was so broken because it wasn't enough that he's going to schlep to buy bagels, but his davening was not going well. His connection to Hashem wasn't going well. Nothing was going well. So he said, Rav Nosson to himself, was this what I was created for? To buy bagels? He was just so brokenhearted. He was so brokenhearted that he just forgot about the group. He left them. I don't know if he brought the bagels in the end. I don't know about that part. But he found some open basement this Saturday night that was still open. He went to the Weiberschule, the women's section. He opened the Tehillim, and he just started saying word for word of the Tehillim, bawling his eyes out, using what King David said as an expression for what he was going through. And he was so pained, he reached up to chapter 50, 50, and he conked out. He was so exhausted after crying so much, 50 chapters of Tehillim straight, and just crying and crying. He was so exhausted. He conked out on the floor, and he dreamt the following dream. He dreamt that he saw himself on the earth, and next to him was a ladder, Sulam, Mutzav Arza, Verosho Magia Shamaima. He saw a ladder whose legs were on the earth, and the top of the ladder was reaching up to heaven. And he saw himself in his dream climbing up the ladder, up and up and up and up, and then he fell from the ladder. And then he saw himself in the dream climbing again, up and up and up, and this time he passed where he last was on the ladder, and he fell again. And this kept on happening. He kept on going higher, but he kept on falling. He almost reached the end of the ladder up to heaven. He almost reached the end, and he fell again. And at that point, he wanted to give up. But then he saw from far a face, a clear face, even though it's like from heaven to earth. He saw the face clearly of someone telling him in Yiddish, Halt sich und rob sich. Climb, but hold yourself. In other words, don't give up. So with that, he climbed again, and he finally reached the end of the ladder. So a year passed from that dream, and 1802 arrived. Rav Nosson finally met Rabbi Nachman. He saw Rabbi Nachman's face, and it matched the face in the dream that he had a year earlier. And Rabbi Nachman said, now I'm not alone. Now something new is going to start. And Rav Nosson felt that he had found his diamond. He found his treasure chest. He felt if this tzaddik now has what to offer me, then no other tzaddik has what to offer me. And his life began to change. And he eventually became Rabbi Nachman's scribe. He even told him, everything you hear from me, every single detail, you write down everything. Everything, because everything contains Torah. Even his worldly conversations. Rav Nosson regretted. He said, I only wrote like a thousandth, I'm not less than 1,000th of what Rabbi Nachman actually spoke and what I could have actually recorded, and because he didn't take it as seriously as he should have. He started recording for himself some things, and then he saw this has to be recorded, and he started recording more and more. And then Rabbi Nachman made the statement, everything you hear from me, record. Everything. And he regrets that he didn't record, but what we do have today, everything you have recorded is from Rav Nosson. The entire Likutei Moran, all the BRESLOV books, anything you know today about Rabbi Nachman and BRESLOV is all thanks to Rav Nosson writing it down. If Rav Nosson didn't write it down, and also there's the oral traditions that pass down from the BRESLOVers, from Rav Nosson and other BRESLOVers, okay? But if it wasn't for Rav Nosson, there would be no BRESLOV movement. There would be no Tikkun HaKlali today. Nothing, okay? No Tikkun HaKlali, no amazing teachings that are lifesavers. You wouldn't have any of this. We owe so much for this disciple of Nosson for giving us Rabbi Nachman, giving us. So back to Rabbi Nachman, 1802 until 1810. Rabbi Nachman passed away in 1810, the end of 1810, 1811, really. Taf Kuf Ayin Aleph, he passed away. But it's still 1810. It was like after the new year, Taf Kuf Ayin Aleph, fine. So 1810. 8 years Rabbi Nachman spent in BRESLOV. Those 8 years transformed Rav Nosson's life. Those 8 years gave Rav Nosson the guidance of how to continue until Mashiach should come. He received from Rabbi Nachman guidelines of what the Jewish people will need in order to stay afloat for all the crazy challenges. Get ready now. Now we're facing AI, right? AI. Now we're facing AI. What's next? Okay. As if the internet wasn't enough when it came as a crash in the early 90s. It came, and then the smartphone with the bringing the internet to everyone in the private room. You used to need a computer for the internet. Now you anywhere in the world, and it just fried people's brains. That's what the internet has done. It's now so addictive. Everyone, every house, every household has a family member who's just stuck with the smartphone. And now AI, okay? What's interesting is Hashem is Tamid Makdim Refuah Lifnei Hamaka. Hashem always sends, this is the rule Rashi brings down in Megillat Esther. Rashi quoting the sages in Megillat Esther, why Esther was taken into the Achashverosh, and all the stories of Biktan and Teresh and everything that happened was Hashem is, Rashi brings this down, Hashem is Makdim Refuah Lifnei Hamaka. When Hashem sends a difficulty, he sends the antidote already beforehand. That means with any challenge we're faced, we already have a catch, a net catch, whatever you express that, however you say that, a catch net. We have a protective force already available even before. So there's no excuse to say, oh, Hashem has abandoned us. He's sending us that the bad is way up here and the good is all the way down here. Not so. Mida tova meruba, the good is there. You have to just look for it. Where is the good? Okay, where's the good? You got to look for it, mister. You got to look for it. You think that's going to come on a silver platter? No way, Jose. You got to look for the good. So, 8 years Rabbi Nachman spent in BRESLOV until his house was burnt in a fire on Rosh Chodesh Iyar in the year 1810. And the next day, he got an invitation already to come to Uman. The whole story of Uman is so phenomenal. Like Rav Nosson writes, your pages and pages in books will not be enough to write the whole concept. That's a Uman in Rabbi Nachman's life wasn't just a historical story, it was a whole thing. The whole story with Rabbi Nachman's connection with the leading maskilim, the leading enlightened, reformed leaders who lived in Uman. These guys were dangerous. These guys were very big shots. Heikel Horvitz, Hirschber Horvitz, who later became Professor Herman Bernard in what's the name, Oxford University, Cambridge University in London, in England, sorry. And Moshe Landau, a grandson of the Noda Bihuda, who fell off. Not surprising. Noda Bihuda was a staunch misnagid for a time, and his grandson eventually fell off the path. Can you believe that? Moshe Landau and Hurwitz, Herman Bernard, who were some opinions say they were son-in-laws of Heikel Horvitz. Heikel Horvitz was a leading disciple of Naftali Wiesel. Naftali Wiesel was a leading disciple of Moses Mendelssohn from Germany. Naftali Wiesel, all these people were Talmidei Chachamim. These people excelled in Torah study, which is what made them dangerous, because they used the Torah itself to go against it. In other words, the book written by Naftali Wiesel, called Yein Levanon, explained why, according to the Torah, it makes sense to join the nations and to become mixed into the culture and the language and the etiquette and the attitude of the Goyim. Scary. And you can't joke with these people because they know Torah better. They know all the pages in the Gemara inside out. These guys, they knew everything. Rishonim, Acharonim, you name it. They were big shots. So they were dangerous. And Naftali Hertz Weisel's main disciple was Heikel Horvitz, who lived where? In Uman. Of all places in the world, in Uman, where Rabbi Nachman was called to. Along with his two dangerous son-in-laws, Moshe Landau was a doctor, a very special doctor that very rich people used him. And Heikel Horvitz eventually became this professor of Hebraica in Cambridge University. He's buried there even, believe it or not. He's buried in the middle of a Christian cemetery, which is allocated to all the professors of Cambridge University. You have sticking out all the crosses, one Jewish professor that his matzeva is written in Hebrew. Hirschber Horvitz, before he passed away with a charata, a regret. His son-in-laws wrote a letter to Nachman Tulchiner, because this in itself is a whole story. How they maintained connection to the Breslov Hasidim. That's how connected they were. He was, even though he was anti-religious and everything, he held a high respect to Rabbi Nachman and his followers. And they said in the letter that Hirschber passed away with the Rebbe, Rabbi Nachman, on his lips. While he was dying, Hirschber, he said, the Rebbe, and that's how he passed away. They wrote the letter to Nachman of Tulchin in Uman about his passing. In any event, Uman was a seat of these leading maskilim in all the Ukraine. All three of these maskilim, each one of them, Heikel Horvitz, Moshe Landau, Hirschber Horvitz, all three received a golden sword from the Tsar of Russia at the time. I forgot if it's Nikolai or Alexander. I forgot. Please forgive me. My expertise on history is not that good. But they received as a token of appreciation of how smart they were and how highly they were esteemed in the eyes of the Tsar. They each received a golden sword from the Tsar of Russia. That's how big they were and respected. And they're the ones who became so friendly and they loved Rabbi Nachman. They loved Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman knew how to talk with them. He knew how to get to them. He read their minds, he even showed to them that he was able to read their minds. There's a story. 8 years before Rabbi Nachman passed away, on his way from Zlatipolia to Breslov, he passed by Uman and he spent Shabbat in Uman, 1802. Okay, this is before he passed away, even before mentioning Uman as a place to die in and to pass away in. 1802, he came to Shabbat, and it's the custom when a Hasidic Rebbe comes, people come and they make a tish and everything. So these three maskilim, they had a party, a great time coming to visit. Anytime a big rabbi would come, they would come to mock him, to make fun of him. Many Hasidic rabbis tried to come to Uman, but they made such a fool out of him. These three maskilim, they made a mockery that they had to flee. So they wanted to do the same thing, Rabbi Nachman. So Rabbi Nachman was giving a drasha on that Shabbat, I think it was a Friday night, and they walked in. As soon as they walked in, Rabbi Nachman started discussing a very serious mathematical problem connected to the formula of pi. Pi, you remember pi? 3.18, etc. Goes on, right? The Gemara on Masechet Sukkah goes into it on page 8. I think it's Chet Amud Aleph, and also Masechet Eruvin. And there's a Tosfot on it and the calculation, because it goes into the calculation of what was in the temple, the Yam Shel Shlomo, the Yam, the sea of King Solomon. That was what he built, the base of the altar or of the kior. One of the two is called Yam Shel Shlomo. And the Gemara there goes into the circular functioning of pi in the usage of it in the formation of a clear, complete circle. So he started talking about the formulation of pi. And Chaikel told his son-in-laws, he's talking to us now. He's not talking to them. He's talking to us. So listen carefully. So Nachman delved into the mathematical problem and he solved it to their satisfaction. They were so impressed on his grasp of mathematics. These people, being highly intellectual, their whole interest is intellect. So when someone speaks to them something, a very high mathematical problem, they're into it. They liked it. So they were impressed. Okay? So after he spoke, they came up to say to Rabbi Nachman, they were impressed. And then Rabbi Nachman began to mock them. He said to them, "Why have you come to me?" They said, we heard a big rabbi was coming to town, so we came to show respects. So Rabbi Nachman says, "Why don't you go to the general of the Russian army who's across the street in that house over there? He's more your type." With saying that, he stung them. They became intrigued because no one was able to have the audacity and the wit to talk to them like that. So they were shocked. They left, but they wanted to come back for more. So they came back another time, and then he spoke to them personally. And we don't know exactly what he said to them, but he won them over. And they said to him, "We want you to stay here." We kicked out many Rebbes tried to come to Uman, because Uman at the time, you should know, was a place of very deep immorality and a lot of philosophy. These people were there. One of the first secular Jewish schools opened in the Ukraine in 1821 was opened in Uman. Forced secular Jewish education upon Jewish children was opened with the guidance of these guys here, was opened in Uman. Uman was a city, as much as there were from people, you had these maskilim and secular Jews also living there. So they had a stronghold, okay? They said to Rabbi Nachman, "We want you to move here." So I wanted to say, many other Rebbes tried to move to Uman, try to clean the situation. It didn't work. They got kicked out. Here, these maskilim, they invited Rabbi Nachman. They said, we want you to be here with us. Rabbi Nachman said 8 years earlier, when you send me the book, Yein Levanon, from your leader, from your teacher, Naftali Wiesel, he was addressing Chaikel. So when you send me the book, Yein Levanon, then I will come to move. So 8 years passed. Rabbi Nachman's house was burnt on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. right? It was on a Shabbat, Friday night, Shabbat. Sunday, a messenger came from Uman to BRESLOV with the book Yain Levanon. 8 years later. And they said the messenger said to Rabbi Nachman, they're ready to receive you. And Rav Nosson writes, when Rabbi Nachman received the book, his face turned like burning red because he knew he was being summoned to die. That was his indication. It's such depth. We're not even going into it so much, but there's so much depth involved. He said, Rabbi Nachman, you have no idea who's waiting for me to come to be buried in Uman. You think just the tens of thousands of martyrs who are buried there? More than that, he says, tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of souls are waiting for me to come to Uman to be buried there in order to rectify these souls which are lost in limbo. There are hundreds of thousands of souls, he said, who have been waiting for centuries, waiting for a tikkun. They, for some reason, trapped in what's called olam tohu, the world of vanity, not knowing a rest in Gan Eden and not Gehinam, trapped in a limbo, waiting for someone like me to come along to rectify these souls through my dying, through my passing. Unbelievable. There's a whole thing that Rabbi Nachman, on the way from BRESLOV to Uman, they left on the 2nd of ER and they arrived on Hey ER. The very Zionistic Jews, they very celebrate Hey ER. They say that's the founding of the state of Israel, and that's the date Rabbi Nachman came to Uman. They make the connection there, right? It's a nice connection there. On Hey ER, yes, Rabbi Nachman arrived in Uman. On the way, it took a time for Rav Nosson to organize a wagon and also Rabbi Nachman's possessions and the family to get them all to get to Uman, right? So on the way, Rabbi Nachman told Rav Nosson a story about the Baal Shem Tov. That the Baal Shem Tov ended up in a city, a village for Shabbat, and he had a very sad face. No one knew why. The Baal Shem Tov told his host, make an announcement that anybody who has nowhere to sleep, to eat, and whoever should come and eat with me for the Shabbat. So they found two people, two hobos, two people like nomads, whatever, traveling, and they brought them to the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov got into an argument with them. And after that Shabbat, not long after, these two men died. And the Baal Shem Tov explained like this. He said he ended up in this village against his will. He said there were souls waiting in this village thousands of years. That's very hard to understand. Jewish souls in a Ukrainian village, before even Jews came to that part of the world, souls were trapped in this tiny village in Hicktown in the Ukraine, waiting for someone of the Baal Shem Tov's caliber to come there to rectify them. You hear that? It's like dealing with a ball game that's way above our capacity. It's something beyond. We just have to accept it with Amuna on these stories that we hear about them, that are written down. So Baal Shem Tov said he saw that the severity of how to rectify these souls was so profound that it would require his death, his passing, in order to rectify them. And the Baal Shem Tov said that's why I was so sad, because I was being summoned to die. So he came up with an idea that is able to transfer the passing by inviting these two people who anyways did something that they were punishable from heaven, a death sentence, but he's able to switch his death onto those two people who anyways had to die eventually, and that way he was able to rectify the people in that city and avoid dying. So Rabbi Nachman told this story to Rav Nosson, and the night before he passed away, Rabbi Nachman told Rav Nosson in Uman, he said, do you remember the story I told you? Rav Nosson said to Rabbi Nachman, which story? Because Rav Nosson said, I heard many stories from the Rebbe. He said, the story I told you about the Baal Shem Tov. And Rav Nosson turned white because he panicked, because that story talks about the Baal Shem Tov dying. And Rabbi Nachman's telling, do you remember the story I told you? And Rabbi Nachman told Rav Nosson this statement. There are not tens of thousands of souls here. There are tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of souls waiting for me to rectify them. And he indicated that it's through his passing. So there's a lot of depth into the whole idea, the concept of Uman and Rabbi Nachman choosing that place to be buried. And like Rav Nosson said himself, that place has been set for Rabbi Nachman from the 6 days, Sheshet Yemei Bereshit. He said, this is Rav Nosson's wording in Yemei Moranat, that this place has been reserved for Rabbi Nachman from the 6 days of creation. This is why when people recently suggested, including Rav Moshe Feinstein, alav shalom, take Rabbi Nachman's body and bring it to the Holy Land. So the answer is we can't touch it, because he said clearly that that place, Rav Nosson said, and Rav Nosson, we take very, very seriously every word he says. Why? Because Rabbi Nachman himself said about Rav Nosson that nobody understands me in this world except for Rav Nosson, which means I have to work more on trying to understand how Rav Nosson understands Rabbi Nachman, and not how I exclusively understand Rabbi Nachman. Me, with my lens and my perspective, my upside down eyes and my upside down brain, how I understand Rabbi Nachman. I need the Talmid, this disciple, where Rabbi Nachman gave his haskama on him. He gave his approval that he understands me better than everybody else. See how Rav Nosson interprets me and not how you interpret me. That's Rav Nosson. He's the one who wrote this, that Rabbi Nachman, his place in Uman is from the 6 days of creation, which is why we can't touch the grave. I know people, there are many sub-movements of BRESLOV that say, no, you have to take him out. We don't touch it. You come now to argue Rav Nosson. You have a greater validity than Rav Nosson. I'm sorry. It doesn't work like that. So this is why Rabbi Nachman is buried there, why we kill ourselves every year to pay crazy tickets and everything. And now with this quote-unquote war in Ukraine, I don't know if there's any war really, we have to go through a second country to come into Ukraine. We do that to be by Rabbi Nachman for Rosh Hashanah. Once Rabbi Nachman said, he has his book Likutei Moran. Okay, that's the main book of it. That's the main magnum opus of Rabbi Nachman is Likutei Moran. Above that, you have his book called The Burnt Book, which was burnt. That's why we don't know anything about it. And above that, Rabbi Nachman said he had another book called The Hidden Book, Sefer HaGanuz, which no one even knows about. He never spoke to anyone about it. Rabbi Nachman once said, however, being by me for Rosh Hashanah, he said even Uman Rosh Hashanah is even greater than the hidden book, which means greater than all the Kol Sheken, the burnt book, and greater Kol Sheken, greater than the Likutei Moran. This is why it is probably the biggest accomplishment of Rabbi Nachman's advice is being in Uman Rosh Hashanah. He said, we said earlier, Rabbi Nachman said, Gor mein Zach is tefillah. My thing is davening. He also said a second statement, which seems to go against this. He also said, Gor mein Zach is Rosh Hashanah. My whole thing, Kol ha'inyan sheli is Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Nachman decide, is it Rosh Hashanah or is it davening? So the BRESLOVers, they say it's the exact same thing. The secret for prayer, for Itbodedut, is accomplished by being by Rebbe Nachman for Rosh Hashanah. I know this sounds hard for most people, and women who hear that, what, we lose out? The women don't lose out, by the way, if they have a representative being there, B'ezrat Hashem, you're there with us for now. Ideally, the whole world should be like there. In other words, Uman Rosh Hashanah should eventually become like Meron, like Ba'omer, where men, women, children come flocking there, right? Hundreds of thousands make it, if not 1 million people make it to Meron Lag BaOmer. Eventually, we hope it should be set up that families should be there. This I heard from Rav Michal Dorfman, alav shalom, who was one of the BRESLOV elders. He passed away in the year 2006 at the age of 94. I remember him saying this clearly, that ideally everyone should be in Uman for Rosh Hashanah, even women. But the way things are set right now, you can't have men and women there. It's not organized. It's such an upside down, floppy, old village. And it's Nachon, there's nice 5-star hotels, fine and dandy, bravo, shkoyach, very nice. Good food, cuisine, gourmet food. What we eat in Uman is even better than the food served at home. I'm sorry to say that. The gourmet food we get in Uman, Rosh Hashanah, unfortunately or fortunately, is better than what is served at home, even, believe it or not, okay? It's now 5-star, it's gone up. But eventually everyone should be there, B'ezrat Hashem, and it's not yet set up for that, okay? So what's the idea? Is the secret for tefillah. Rav Nosson goes into this, believe it or not, in his last discourse. Rav Nosson's last discourse in Likutei Halachot, which he passed away in the middle of writing, is Likutei Halachot, Rosh Chodesh, the laws of Rosh Chodesh, discourse number 7 in his book Likutei Halachot. Rav Nosson says the secret for tefillah, for the mishpat of davening, comes from being Rosh Hashanah by the tzaddik, where it's also the new year, and it's also the new moon. It's the first day of Tishrei, and it's the first day of the year. So it's a day when it collides the new year cycle of the sun And the New Year cycle of the moon, it's Rosh Chodesh, it's for the moon, the lunar cycle for Tishrei, and it's the solar cycle for the year, the upcoming new year. They join together, and the sun and the moon are the concept of Torah and Tefillah. Rabbi Nosson says the sun is the Torah, which is clarity, like the sun is clear, and compared to the clarity of the sun is the davening, which is emunah. The davening is to fulfill what's in the Torah. The Torah is clear, okay? The Torah is like the sun, but then when you see where you are in fulfilling the Torah, it's very blacky, very gloomy, very gray, very upside down, wishy-washy. You're more like the moon. You're wanting to fulfill the Torah is like light years away. The Torah is absolute. It's complete. No problem. Chumash, Rashi, Gemara, Mishnah, Zohar, Kabbalah, you name it, it's complete. When you learn Torah, when a Jew learns Torah, they feel they're touching something which is shalem, complete. But now when I close the book and I go to my day-to-day living, I see that I'm like separated. Where's all the Torah that I learned? How come it's not brushing off of me? Where's the change that Torah should do in my life? That's davening. That's davening. That's why Nachman said, I came to the world to teach people how to daven, how to make that connection between the davening, you, and the Torah, to connect, how the prayer should connect you to the Torah. That's what he said, Rosh Hashanah. My whole thing my whole thing is davening. But he also said, my whole thing is Rosh Hashanah, because the secret to get into davening, you get from the tzaddik. You come to the tzaddik on Rosh Hashanah, which is the sun and the moon join, the joining of the tefillah, your broken tefillah, which is emunah. Because when you're davening, you're not davening with your brain. When a Jew davens, it's called avodah shebalev, right? We say every day in the Shema, ulovdo bechol levavchem ubechol nafshechem, to serve Hashem with all your heart. Rashi says, if you recall, several times in the Chumash, ez avodah shebalev, what is considered a service of the heart? Zot tefillah. Haviomer is a tefillah, it's davening. Davening is the heart, okay? So the moon, which is waning, waxing, sometimes it's a full moon, sometimes it's a half moon, that's where I'm holding. And the davening is coming from that perspective, to be able to properly daven, to join me to the sun. That's on Rosh Hashanah. We go to the tzaddik to receive that connection properly, B'ezrat Hashem, okay? So Nachman made this big thing. Everyone who listens to him, who takes seriously Rabbi Nachman's teaching, should be in Uman for should be by him for Rosh Hashanah. Ish Bali Ader. It's Rav Nosson who put his foot down, and he says, I understood totally, clearly, 100% from Rabbi Nachman that this is to continue even and especially after his passing. Okay, that's why the kibbutz, the gathering in Uman, has been taking place until now. Woo, this is supposed to be BRESLOV in a nutshell. I think we gave a lot of details. We'll try to give another class like this. B'ezrat Hashem. If you have a suggestion of what you want to hear from Rabbi Nachman's teachings, please WhatsApp me or send me an email. All the best to be continued. Thank you for joining. It was a very exciting experience tonight. All the best, everybody. Thank you.